welcome to True Health Tuesdays. And today is part 2 of Nutritional Myths Debunked by Science. And the thing is, when you're gonna, dispose of a myth, we gotta present scientific facts. So a lot of this is gonna be how my myths part 1 went, where we show you the peer-reviewed research on the topic, and then we're going to show you the absolute facts, the quotations, everything, so we can just get rid of these myths once and for all. So we're not really going to be giving like major health advice, but we're going to be able to say like, is coffee bad for you? Well, we'll be able to debunk those myths, but not necessarily saying that we all should be drinking 5 cups of coffee per day, per se. But these are important distinctions, and what we're going to cover today is 4 topics. We're going to uncover the myths on meat consumption, coffee consumption, whole grains, breads, as well as gluten-free foods. And so a lot of these myths I talk about in my book, which you have right there. Now, I believe it's the most detailed scientific explanation on intermittent fasting, but we also talk a lot about nutrition in there. So I believe each one of you guys would benefit from reading that. And for myth number 1, we're going to expose is that meat is bad for you. Everyone's heard it before, especially from vegetarians. They're going to go after that. And is there any truth to this myth? And that's what we're going to look at today, because the problem is that, red meat in particular has been kind of characterized as causing chronic disease, cancer, diabetes, heart disease. And in the research, it's hard to find a research article where it actually distinguishes processed versus unprocessed meats. It's hard to find those. Usually they just generalize the category as meat consumption. It's kind of similar to dairy consumption. They're going to say, oh, dairy's bad, but they're not distinguishing between raw, unpasteurized, healthy dairy that's made from grass-fed cows versus conventional pasteurized dairy made from grain-fed cows. So they don't really distinguish those very much so until recently, and that's what we're going to go over. And so let's look at the link between meat and cancer, because one of the biggest ones out there is meat, especially red meat, causes colorectal cancer. A lot of people talk about this. And so when you're looking at these 2 studies in particular, and these are out of 2011 out of the journal Obesity Reviews, as well as the European Journal of Cancer Prevention. What they did is they're looking at the link between meat consumption, but they're not distinguishing between processed and unprocessed, where it gets a little fishy here, but they're looking just at general meat consumption, and there's absolutely no association that they found between that and cancer. When we're talking about colorectal cancer here, but you're going to see a general trend where they cannot find any evidence of doing that. So right away when someone says it causes cancer, you can already say, no, it's completely false. It's believed to cause cancer, but it doesn't. Now, here's the thing. Here's the big however in this component here, because according to the National Cancer Institute, obviously, if you overcook meat, it can lead to these cancerous compounds like heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These are all the things you get when you burn meat, all that black char. That's absolutely cancerous. And so they do have a point when it comes to burnt meat. But I mean, I don't think burnt meat's very, appetizing anyway, but that's absolutely true. But the thing is, it's not just with meat consumption and overcooking. That's with anything that's overcooked. However, we think of overcooking meat as it's very popular, because when we're barbecuing and stuff, a lot of times we're getting this big black char in there, and that's not necessarily good for you. Obviously, it's filled with tons of cancerous compounds. So you do not want to do that. So the summary here is that the link between unprocessed red meat and cancer is non-existent. And it also may depend, though, on how the meat is cooked, because if it's burnt, it could cause cancer, or it could promote cancer because of the, the heterocyclic compounds, all those dangerous substances. So we got to make sure that you cook with lower temps. It's always good to cook with a lower temperature, and make sure if it is burnt, cut off the burnt part. Seems like common sense, which most people do anyway, but you just got to cut it off. So that's with cancer. Now, what about meat and other chronic diseases like, heart disease, diabetes, stroke? And we're going to cover all of this. And when you're looking at here, this is probably one of the coolest articles I found, and this is in the journal Circulation in the year 2010. And what they found is that they actually compared red unprocessed meat versus processed meat and your incidence of chronic disease. And so this is like very few of its kind where they actually looked at the difference. And what they found, and this is in the conclusion of the article, that the consumption of processed meats, but not red meat, that's unprocessed, is associated with higher incidence of heart disease and diabetes. And then what they're telling you later on in this passage is that they're saying that we need to focus our dietary restrictions on the process, you know, the stuff that's bad for you, and not worry about the unprocessed meat, which is actually has a lot of health benefits for us. So there's absolutely a difference between the two kinds. And so massive studies have been done on this, and there is absolutely no link. And I'm not going to say that everyone should eat meat. You know, I'm not going to say that that every vegetarian, every vegan is wrong. I'm just saying that you cannot accurately say that meat is bad for you, because it's not. And so what we're looking at here is with meat consumption, you know, even vegetarians will say, well, we're not even meant to have meat. And so I beg to differ, and let's look at the research, because in these journal articles, we're going to cover two more questions. Does meat consumption have evolutionary benefits? And if so, are humans even designed to eat in the first place? Are we designed to eat meat? And so what you're going to find out is that in this, the Journal of American Clinical Nutrition, they looked at all our hunter-gatherer societies worldwide, and they examined their plant versus animal food intake, the ratio of plant to animal food. And what they found, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but this is huge, because what you're going to see is that hunter-gatherers consumed high amounts of animal food. Most, over 73% of them, derived over 50% of their food from animal foods. So over 73% of our ancestors, our hunter-gatherer populations, got most of their substance through animal foods, whereas only 14% got more than 50% from plant foods. So that's a very, very big distinction there. And what they're saying here, and if you look down, this high reliance on animal-based foods coupled with the low carbohydrate content of wild plant foods shows you that these macronutrient consumption ratios is where protein is elevated at the expense of carbohydrates. So what that's saying is that these guys had a diet of high in healthy fats, high protein, and low carbohydrates, because naturally high-quality wild plant foods are low in carbohydrates. And that's what that's saying there. So when people are saying, oh, we're made to eat bread, all this, it's bogus. It's bogus. Over 70% do not have that. Now, is it even, now that we know that they actually consumed it, what did it do for the development of the human species in general? And what they found out from this article in the Journal of Nutrition is that without access to animal foods, it would be highly unlikely that evolving humans could have achieved their unusually large and complex brain while simultaneously continuing their evolutionary trajectory as large, active, and highly social primates. So we differ from a lot of these other social primates out there because of our large, very complex brains. You know, other animals don't have that. And they're saying that we wouldn't be able to develop those if it wasn't for the consumption of animal foods, which is very fascinating to me. And they're going around and they're saying, even with young children in particular, that they're rapidly expanding large brains and their high metabolic nutritional demands. That means that they would have benefited greatly from high quality animal foods such as meat. And so basically we're evolutionarily made to have meat consumption because it helps with our developing brain. And without it, possibly our brains wouldn't be developed and as complex as it is today. You never know. So the summary is that unprocessed meat is a great source of high quality protein, and it's an important part of your evolutionary diet of humans, and it's what allowed people to grow taller and develop larger, more complex brains. And that's what sets us apart from other animals in particular. And when you're looking at our digestive systems, it actually promotes meat consumption because we have short colons, we have very large small intestines, and our stomachs have lots and lots of hydrochloric acid, which is made to digest the protein from animal foods. So we're actually made like that, and we're completely different than other herbivores that only eat plant foods based on our digestive system. Not to mention our incisor teeth, which is made to shred meat. Yeah, we wouldn't be having all of these things if it was completely undestined to have meat ever. So it's very important, but again, if someone's eating processed meat all the time, obviously they're not going to be healthy. So there is a difference in meat quality, but it is absolutely healthy if it's real unprocessed meat. And besides the processed and unprocessed things, it's kind of similar but a little different than grain-fed and grass-fed meat. And you're going to see from the picture that it's already different from the look of it, because when you have meat, it's got to be from the natural produced meat, meaning that the cows that you get the meat from, say cows, they got to be grass-fed. They have chambered stomachs to ferment grass. But what happens is that nowadays they're giving them a lot of grains because it makes them fatter, faster, which is good for production, but it also gives them tumors, excessive gas, it makes them completely unhealthy, and so it's not sustainable. So obviously the nutrient profile of these meats are going to be completely different. So it's got to be grass-fed, unprocessed meat we're talking here. But it is absolutely healthy if it's the right kind. So that's the bottom line. Now, the second myth we're going to talk about is coffee. Coffee is a hot topic. First of all, I am a coffee drinker. I'm from Seattle, okay? Coffee's big. Now, a lot of people say coffee is unhealthy, and mostly because it gets a bad rap because of its caffeine content. You know, they like to put it in categories such as the other energy drinks out there. They like to say that, oh, you know, it's unhealthy, it's used as a vice, crutch to get that quick energy boost, especially midday at that 3 p.m. crash people get or whatever. But that's kind of the reputation coffee gets. But again, let's look at the science, because that's the easy way. So, does coffee have a link to cancer? And let's look at that, because here, let's first look at liver cancer, because there's a lot of studies actually out there on coffee consumption and any type of chronic disease. So with liver cancer, they're going to show that all the studies they looked at, because they did a meta-analysis of all the studies done on coffee and liver cancer. They're not saying some of the studies, they're saying all the studies out there show an inverse relationship between coffee consumption and the risk of liver cancer. So an inverse relationship means the more coffee, the less cancer. In fact, 43% reduction of liver cancer. Now that's huge. There's no way something can be unhealthy that reduces your risk of liver cancer by 43%. That just makes absolutely no sense. But again, that's liver cancer. So do we get the same thing from stage 3 colon cancer? And the answer is yes. Significantly reduced cancer reoccurrence with higher coffee intake. And in fact, they go down and they look at dose-dependent ones where if you consume 4 or more cups a day, which is a lot of coffee, but 4 or more cups, you're going to have a 52% reduction. Versus if you have 2 to 3 cups, you're going to have a 31% reduction. Either way, a 31 to a 52% reduction in colon cancer, that's huge. Which, you know, and some people say it causes, gastric or, digestive distress. Well, actually, it's probably cleaning you out because it does reduce your risk of colon cancer in the first place. And that's what the evidence shows. So, we got liver cancer, we got colon cancer. Now, let's just look at all cancer, because there's a study on that too. Now, coffee drinking, and this is in quotations from the conclusions of the articles. Coffee drinking was associated with reduced risk. It's a lot. Bladder, breast, buccal and pharyngeal, colorectal, endometrial, esophageal, liver, leukemic, pancreatic, and prostate cancers. Wow. It's a lot of cancer. So overwhelmingly, the research shows that coffee consumption results in a massive reduction in cancer, period. So particularly liver and colorectal cancer, those are the 3rd and 4th leading causes of cancer deaths worldwide. Now, coffee drinkers have lower risk of both, but also what we saw from that last article of all types of cancer in general. So that's cool. I mean, that made me feel good, you know. But I'm not biased, you know. I'm going to present the research that I see it, but again, what about coffee and heart health? So we covered the cancer, what about heart health? Well, this is really cool because from this journal article, they show that coffee consumption shows a lower prevalence of subclinical coronary atherosclerosis. So you have a lot less coronary artery plaque when you consume coffee. So here, those who drink a moderate amount of coffee, I like how they say moderate as less than 5 cups. It's not very descriptive there, you know, like what about 1, but this is what it says. less than 5 cups were less likely to have calcium deposits in their coronary arteries, which is what is atherosclerosis, which was what causes heart disease in the first place, the #1 leading killer in the US today. Now again, yeah, because the coronary artery calcium is a predictor of not only heart attacks, but just heart disease in general. So we got that. It also reduces the incidence of stroke. And this isn't just some like small sample size. This is looking at 480,000 people in 11 different studies. And again, you're going to show that drinking 1 to 6 cups of coffee, you're going to be associated with a lower risk of stroke. So this is all cancers, this is heart disease, this is coronary plaque, this is stroke, this is a lot of stuff out there showing the link with coffee consumption. And so I'm getting a little selfish here because we're going to go even more with coffee because this is crazy. Because Alzheimer's, you know, the #1 leading cause of dementia, you know, if you've known anyone with Alzheimer's, you know that it's devastating. You know, they can't remember anything. But what they're showing here is that in the European Journals of Neurology, they're showing that the caffeine intake from coffee actually massively reduces the risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. In fact, up to a 65% lower risk. And again, here's all the quotations from these articles. And again, lower risk of Alzheimer's disease, which is the leading cause of dementia worldwide. Finally, out of the New England Journal of Medicine, they looked at just coffee consumption and just all-cause mortality. So not heart disease, just everything. And again, you're going to see a common theme here. Less deaths, less heart disease, respiratory disease, stroke, injuries and accidents, diabetes, and infections. So that's a lot of stuff. So coffee is absolutely not bad for you. And when you look at the top 10 causes of death worldwide, you're going to see, here's the list here. You know, you got the heart disease, cancer, respiratory diseases. First of all, we know that it slashes the top 3 from the research. Well, we also know that it slashes 5 through 7. But it also does just injuries in general. So it slashes that one. So you're talking, it slashes 7 of the top 10 causes of death. That's crazy. So it's absolutely not unhealthy. But again, it's the #1 cause, it's the #1 source of antioxidants for people living in the US. I'm not saying it has the most antioxidants, it's just it's the majority of people, how they get most of their antioxidants is through coffee. The polyphenols, the antioxidants, the hydrocinamic acid, always very protective. You know, we always hear a lot about antioxidants from blueberries and stuff. Coffee is one of the big ones out there too. But what's interesting is that most of these studies, it's not done on the decaffeinated coffee. It's in coffee in the natural state with caffeine, especially with the cancers. And the reason is and you've probably seen this, if you ever go to like Starbucks or something, you're gonna see these warning labels, you know, with like cancer and stuff. Reason is because what they use for a common decaffeinated process is called direct process, where they use methyl chloride to kind of distract the caffeine out of the coffee. Now, unfortunately, methyl chloride is a carcinogen and causes cancer, which is why now that law, they have to post those little cancer laws on coffee. Even though not every coffee type is decaffeinated, they still have to post that. Because I mean, I thought that was kind of alarming when I went there and you're seeing like this cancer warning on there. But that's why, it's from the decaffeinated process. But again, if you're sensitive to caffeine, make sure you get certified organic decaffeinated, because they use different methods of extraction. They use something called carbon dioxide or Swiss water methods, which is actually healthy and don't use carcinogens in the process. So they can do it naturally. So if you're sensitive to caffeine, just because a couple of the articles show that it only works with caffeinated, you're still gonna get a lot of other benefits as well. And just in general, pregnant woman, I would strongly recommend just no caffeine whatsoever, because we all know that decaffeinated coffee still has trace amounts. So I'd be safe with the pregnant population, but also you gotta realize that coffee is, in nature, one of the most highly sprayed pesticide beans out there. It is. So if you're gonna do coffee, you gotta make sure that ideally it's organic and fair traded. Because a lot of these studies are done on coffee on the pure source. I mean, they're ridden with pesticides if you're getting it other ways. What's cool is Coffee Bean too now does organic coffee. So we all switched to Coffee Bean. So now, the third myth we're going to talk about is whole grains are good for you. And I'm very passionate about this subject, and I get we get a lot of haters out there who love their bread and hate their meat, and they just want to fight with me on every topic. But I'm just presenting research here, because here, whole grain bread is not actually whole grain in most cases. It sounds good, but it's kind of like these, it's these advertisers' little tricks they do. They can use these certain types of words on food labels, and they can get away with it without any type of FDA regulation. For instance, 100% natural. I can make a product right now and put 100% natural. It can be 100% natural crap, but it's 100% natural. I mean, you can say that on anything. But you obviously, the organic stamp on there, that's a legit one. But there's a lot of stuff out there. So a lot of the labeling companies, they use whole grains. Well, anyone can put made with whole grains, because all it means is that you've started with the whole grain, but ideally what happens, or not ideally, but actually what happens is that grains are pulverized into a very fine powder, basically. And what the problem with that is that it does preserve the nutrients, but it causes rapid digestion. And that's why these are quickly broken down, and you have this crazy spike in blood sugar when you eat bread. Whole grain bread, doesn't matter. But the thing is, the result is that you're going to have this rapid rise in blood sugar. And what happens when you get a rapid rise in blood sugar? Well, it's also going to drop rapidly as well, because you want it consistent. So that means you get that crash afterwards, and you get hungry instantly. Now, what's interesting is that this is on the Harvard website, and they looked at the glycemic index of foods, and they found that whole wheat bread spikes blood sugar faster than many candy bars out there. So how the heck can that be healthy? I mean, seriously. And what happens when you increase blood sugar like that? Well, eventually you're going to get something called insulin resistance, which leads to every chronic disease known on the planet. So that obviously is not good for you. But again, you're going to get that roller coaster blood pressure or blood sugar level, and that's where you get that crash like an hour later, and you're hungry again. So not only is it not very satisfying, keeping your hunger level under control, but it's also just bad for you straight up. Now, also too, there's something called protein glycation. And glycation is when you have excess blood sugar in your system, and it starts to denature these proteins. And what it does is it causes a process called glycation. Now, unfortunately, glycation is a big component of aging. So that advanced glycation you're getting from having these increases in blood sugar from eating too much breads, it's causing advanced aging as well. So that's why by eliminating a lot of the grains out there and adding more healthy protein and healthy fats, you're actually going to look younger. You're going to notice your skin's going to get healthier. A lot of that, when you study acne, when you study any type of thing, you're going to notice that skin clears up when you lower blood sugar, when you lower all the processed sugar out there. And since bread is pulverized, where they break it up, it's not whole grain anymore. So they say it's whole grain, but it's not. It just literally just goes right to your blood sugar. And so again, most bread is made up of pulverized wheat that is easily digested and rapidly spikes the blood sugar, causing insulin resistance, causing advanced aging. That obviously can't be good. But also too, to make matters even worse, is that bread has this anti-nutrient in it called phytic acid. And phytic acid basically binds to all these essential minerals in the gut, preventing from absorption into the body. So not only does it cause a rapid rise in blood sugar, but it's causing your body to rapidly absorb healthy minerals. Now, the type of fiber that is located in breads actually is not very good fiber at all, and it causes your body to burn through its vitamin D stores as a result. Which again, when you have vitamin D deficiency, that's also linked to things like cancer, linked to things like diabetes. So you're going to have problems with that. It's not a whole source of protein, so you're not going to get good protein from it. And again, the gluten in bread, not everyone has full-blown celiac disease, where you have an autoimmune response to the gluten. But gluten does definitely damage the intestinal lining. So a lot of people are sensitive to gluten, and I would argue most people are, but we just don't know because we've never gone off it to see the difference. But what happens is, when you're looking at the summary, you're going to have a damaged intestinal lining, combined from the phytic acid, you're going to have reduced bioavailability of all these essential minerals. It's just not good. But here's the good news, because there is another option out there, and that's using something called soaked or sprouted grain type of breads. And that's going to be the popular things like Ezekiel breads, which is okay because that's grains in its whole form. That's actually a real whole grain, but since whole grain means nothing now, that doesn't do anything. But this whole grain bread, this stuff actually has less phytic acid, so you're going to be able to actually get all the minerals. It's a complete source of protein. It's a lot healthier option. It still has gluten in it, but if you're going for a better source of bread, if we're a bread person out there, a sprouted grain Ezekiel bread is definitely a lot better, and they make tortillas and stuff like that, so it's a way better option if you're looking to improve your health. And finally, our last myth we're going to talk about today is gluten-free foods mean that it's a health food. And here's a lot of common gluten-free foods out there, and I gotta tell you, doing my nutrition consults on a day-to-day basis, you're gonna see things like, oh doc, I only had cookies last night, but they were healthy cookies. I'm like, oh, they're healthy cookies. Yeah, they were gluten-free. You know, and it's like, since when does gluten-free mean healthy? And we just kind of assume that this little magic label means that we're getting some type of health benefit from it. But really, I mean, in 2013, about 1/3 of Americans were on this gluten-free kind of kick and actively searching for foods that were gluten-free, that have that little label on there. The problem is that these gluten-free foods, they are basically processed junk that happen to be gluten-free. They're high in sugar, unhealthy oils, refined grains like cornstarch and tapioca starch. Absolutely, and it's going to be the same problem as your pulverized wheat when we're talking about. Rapidly spiking blood sugar, it's going to be extremely low in essential nutrients. So the solution for gluten-free is to actually choose foods that are naturally gluten-free. You're talking about things like unprocessed plants and animal foods. Because at the end of the day, gluten-free junk food is still junk food. It's the same thing. So if you're obviously if you have full-blown celiacs, there's cases where if you wanted to splurge, you're obviously going to want to get the gluten-free brownies instead of the regular. However, if you're doing that to think that it's actually a health food, you're completely mistaken. So that concludes the myth debunking series. Next month, I'm going to be talking about ADHD. Thanks for coming out, guys. Appreciate it.